My clothes take up space? I repeated, folding the towel with deliberate care. What do you mean by that, Caleb? He didn't look up from his coffee, still in his pressed work shirt, the blue one with thin stripes I'd ironed the night before. Just saying, the coat rack's overfull. Half of it's your old cardigans. We could use that space for umbrellas or something useful. I looked at the rack by the door. 3 of my cardigans hung there, neatly. His wife's scarves, 5 of them, spilled across one hook. Caleb's cycling jacket, his raincoat, 2 caps. My things, if anything, were the only ones behaving. Still, I didn't say that. He added, almost offhand, "Trash day's Monday. Maybe it's time we clear out some stuff. You've got dresses from 20 years ago in that closet." I didn't respond. Not right away. I just finished folding the towel, smoothed its edge, placed it on the stack. Then I wiped the counter once, twice, and went upstairs. His wife wasn't home. Thank God. She would have turned it into a discussion with her tilted head and pretend sweet tone. "It's not personal, Virginia. We just want a modern, airy home." It was always about the home. Not about me. Never about me. In the bedroom I shared with no one, though the house was legally half mine. I opened the closet. My dresses hung just as they always had, quietly. Some were older, yes, but each one held something. A dinner, a graduation, a funeral. You don't just throw out a life because it isn't new. But that morning, I felt no sting. I looked at those dresses and felt something settle in my bones. A final clarity. I opened the second closet, the one where Caleb kept his suits. He didn't know I knew the order of them. The charcoal gray with the silver thread for presentations. The deep navy for conferences. The lighter summer beige he never wore anymore, but kept because you never know. I didn't know much about suits, but I knew when something was expensive, and I knew what took up space. I took out one, then another, then all of them. I folded them neatly, each into its own bag. I didn't wrinkle a single one. I didn't want damage. I wanted removal. Downstairs, the bins waited on the curb. It was Sunday. Tomorrow was trash day. I carried the suits out, 2 at a time, careful not to drag or drop. Placed them gently into the green bin, one over the other. I didn't rush. I wasn't hiding. No one was around. Caleb was in his office typing emails, probably about client deadlines and architectural permits. Last load, the beige one on top. I closed the lid. The bin gave a soft thud, like a punctuation mark. Full. Then I went back inside and opened the closet with my dresses again. Not a single one moved. Not a single one complained. I ran my fingers across them once, like a mother straightening a child's collar. "Stay," I said softly. "You've earned your place." Monday morning, the truck came at 7:45. The same driver as always, with the flannel shirt under his vest. I stood by the porch with my tea, watching them lift the bin. It tilted, opened, swallowed, and slammed shut. I raised my hand. Not in farewell, just in acknowledgement. Then I turned back inside. Caleb was coming down the stairs, distracted, holding a water bottle and phone. He looked at me. "Did you hear the truck?" "Did we put the bins out?" "I did," I said. He nodded. "Good. I was going to, but I forgot." I said nothing. He stopped by the kitchen, took something from the fridge, glanced toward the coat rack. "Still looks cluttered." I sipped my tea. He frowned. "Did you throw anything out?" "Yes," I said calmly. "I did." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't blink. And he didn't ask what, because deep down, some part of him already knew. Caleb was quieter that afternoon. He hovered in doorways, glanced toward the closet, toward the bins, but never asked. I watched him from the kitchen while folding a napkin. His silence told me everything. He knew, but didn't know how to bring it up without admitting he'd deserved it. That was the thing with my son. He was fluent in hints and suggestions. But when it came to truth, he stammered. He hadn't always been like that. I remember the boy who used to curl up beside me during thunderstorms, clutching his toy fire truck and asking if I'd keep the world from falling apart. Always, I'd whisper into his hair. Always. It's a dangerous word. Always. You say it thinking it makes people feel safe, but sometimes it makes them entitled. When Caleb was 15, his father left. Not for another woman, for the road. That's what he said. I need a road and no backseat passengers. He didn't leave us for someone. He left us for no one. I started cleaning houses after that. 3, sometimes 4 a day. Came home smelling of bleach and lemon oil, hands raw and knees bruised. Caleb helped at first, cooked dinner on Mondays. Sorted the laundry on weekends. We were a team, or at least I thought we were. He got a scholarship to the university. Architecture. You'll build better homes than the ones I clean, I said at his graduation. He hugged me then. He even cried. But somewhere in the years that followed, somewhere between the new suits, the new wife, the new silence, the boy who clung to me during storms vanished. He and Alyssa had moved back into the house 2 years ago when the condo they bought flooded. Just temporary, he'd said, just until insurance clears things up. But time has a funny way of stretching when nobody pushes it forward. It was my house. Legally. Bought it with money I saved from cleaning 100 homes, paid the taxes, replaced the roof, planted the garden. But once they moved in, it began to shrink around me. My room became her space. My kitchen rules were her way. I wasn't asked, I was informed. I stayed because that's what women like me do. Women who have spent a life bending don't always realize they can stand. But the coats, the cardigans, the dresses, that's where the line was, apparently. Not the fridge I wasn't allowed to stock, not the TV I wasn't supposed to touch, not the friends I no longer invited. No, the line was cloth on hangers, and he crossed it. That evening, Alyssa came home. She walked past me in the hallway, heels clicking like a metronome, dropped her keys into the bowl I bought 10 years ago, and barely nodded. I was setting the table, 3 plates still, when she stopped in the doorway, eyeing the coat rack. "Where's Caleb's gray overcoat?" she asked. I didn't look up. "In the bin." Her voice tightened. "What bin?" "The green one. Pickup was this morning." She stared, blinked, then said sharply, "That coat was Hugo Boss." "And I'm Virginia Fletcher," I answered, still laying down the forks. Silence. Cold, wide silence. Caleb came in a few minutes later, carrying a bag of groceries, probably trying to play peacemaker without knowing who was at war. Alyssa pulled him aside. I didn't hear the whole exchange, but I caught words. Irresponsible, crazy, boundaries. I sliced the roast chicken. He entered the kitchen finally, looked at me with an expression I recognized. Not anger, not sorrow, caution, as if I'd become something unpredictable. "Mom," he said, "I think we need to talk." I nodded. "We do." We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The light from the overhead fixture caught the streaks in his hair. Silver now, like mine. Funny. He still looked 12 to me. "You can't just throw things away?" he said carefully. I tilted my head. I didn't throw things. I replaced clutter. His eyes narrowed. They were my things. And mine were the ones taking up space. That's what you said. I didn't mean it, like. He stopped, realized how empty that sounded. We looked at each other for a long moment. Finally, I said, "You moved into my house. You've rearranged every room, every rule. I've swallowed it all. But you don't get to erase me." Alyssa's footsteps approached, sharp and fast. "Maybe," she said, standing beside him, "it's time to consider a care facility." I laughed, a soft, short laugh that seemed to rattle her more than any scream. "You mean a home," I said. "You want to put me in a home." "It's not like that," Caleb began. I stood up, slow, deliberate, my hands steady. "I already live in one," I said. "The problem is, you've made it feel like I'm not welcome in it." I took my plate, walked to the small breakfast nook by the window, the one corner they hadn't claimed, sat alone, ate slowly. The silence behind me was louder than any argument. And that night, for the first time in years, I opened the drawer beside my bed and took out a folder I hadn't touched since my husband left. Inside, the deed, the bank accounts, the medical directive, the will. It was time to remember that this space, this name, this life, still belonged to someone. Me. The folder was heavier than I remembered. It had sat there, untouched, for nearly a decade. I kept it, not because I planned to use it, but because I believed that one day Caleb would remember, that maybe he'd ask questions. Care? Show interest in the life he conveniently forgot, ran beneath his feet like old plumbing, unseen but essential. But he never asked. Now I spread the contents across the quilt like pieces of a map. The house deed, in my name, the savings accounts, the certificate of deposit from the sale of my late sister's farm, the notarized medical directive, and the will, last revised 11 years ago. Back then, it had made sense. I'd listed Caleb as my sole heir, executor, and financial power of attorney. Who else was there? I was his mother. He was my son. The bond was supposed to be unbreakable, sacred. I looked at my signature on the last page. I didn't feel sacred. I felt like an inconvenience with cardigans. The next morning, Caleb was gone before I came downstairs. The coffee pot was half empty, the kitchen wiped clean. It was always like that after a confrontation. Him performing routine chores as an apology he didn't have the courage to voice. Alyssa, though, wasn't hiding. She stood in front of the fridge in workout clothes, sipping one of those green drinks she liked, her eyes sharp and unreadable. "Morning?" she said. "Morning." She nodded toward the coat rack. That was unnecessary. The suits. I took a slice of bread from the pantry and put it in the toaster. Perhaps? "I think we're past passive-aggressive behavior, Virginia." I glanced at her slowly. "Oh, I'm done being passive." She smiled without smiling. "What's your plan, then?" I didn't answer. Because my plan began today. I got dressed, my blue knit blouse, simple slacks, the brooch James gave me our last Christmas together. Practical shoes, the kind that say, "I'm not going far, but I'll get there steady." I took the folder and walked 2 blocks to the law office of Diana Keats, who had drawn up my first will after James passed. She still had the same sign on the door, "Legal affairs with personal care." I hoped the second part was still true. "Virginia Fletcher," I said at the front desk. "No appointment, but I'd like to revise some things." Diana appeared within minutes. She looked older, of course, but had the same direct, no-nonsense energy. "It's been a long time," she said, ushering me in. "What's going on?" "I need to change my will," And I'd like to revoke Caleb's financial power of attorney. Diana raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment. She just opened her laptop. Any new heirs you'd like to add? Not heirs, I said, but a change of direction. I told her about May, my niece, my sister Evelyn's girl. We hadn't spoken in years until last Christmas, when May sent a card with her number. Just that. A quiet olive branch. I never called. I should have. Everything to her, I said, if she'll accept it. And Caleb? Remove him, completely. Diana nodded. And the house? I want to transfer it into a trust. Irrevocable. For my protection. You're serious? I am. She started drafting documents. I read everything twice, 3 times. Asked questions, took notes. I wasn't confused. I wasn't acting in anger. I was clear. Before I left, Diana looked at me. You're sure about this? I smiled faintly. For the first time in years. Outside, the air felt sharper, more honest. I walked slower on the way home. Let myself feel each step. The weight in my purse had shifted. No longer the burden of trust given too easily, but the quiet satisfaction of reclaimed control. At home, the house was silent. Alyssa had gone to her office. Caleb wasn't back yet. I sat at the dining table with a cup of tea, looked around at what used to be mine. The curtains had been changed. My porcelain bowl set had been boxed up and replaced with minimalist stoneware. The chairs were new, too, harder, colder. No wonder they didn't like my dresses. They were reminders of warmth. I thought of what Alyssa had said. What's your plan? That was the thing about women like her. They thought in logistics and optics, but they underestimated stillness. They misunderstood silence. My plan wasn't to fight. It was to disappear with dignity. But not before reclaiming my name, legally, financially, and morally. The mail arrived mid-afternoon, mostly junk. One envelope from the bank, confirming my appointment for the next morning. The rest, I fed to the shredder. I was slicing apples for a tart when Caleb came in around 4. He looked tired, shoulders hunched. Hey, he said, not looking up. Hello? He stood there, watching me peel. You're quiet. Sometimes silence says enough. He hesitated. Look, about the suits. I set the knife down, calmly. I've made some changes, I said. His brow furrowed. What kind of changes? To my will, my accounts, the house. He froze. Wait, what are you talking about? I've transferred ownership of the house into a trust. You're no longer listed on any financial documents. What? His voice sharpened. And I've named someone else as my legal representative. You're serious? Yes. He stared at me. Is this punishment? No, I said. This is consequence. He didn't respond, just turned away, ran a hand through his hair. You're overreacting, he muttered. No, I said again. I'm just done underreacting. The bank branch opened at 9 C. I was there by 8:45. It felt like a small kind of protest, showing up before the doors unlocked, as if I couldn't wait one more minute to take my life back. The manager, Mr. Ellison, remembered me. Of course he did. I'd been a client since the bank still used paper ledgers. He walked me into his office, offered coffee I declined, and shut the door behind us with a quiet click. I understand you'd like to update some authorizations? He asked, his tone soft but neutral. I took the folder from my bag and placed it on his desk. I'd like to revoke all third-party access to my accounts. Effective immediately. He hesitated. You mean Caleb? Yes. I said it clearly. I wanted it on the record, in his ears, in the air. My son's name, cut clean from anything that bound him to my finances. I'll need your signature on a few forms, Mr. Ellison said, already tapping his keyboard. While he typed, I looked out the window at the parking lot, a gray sweep of asphalt with a single oak tree pushing its roots up through a crack in the concrete. It had no business thriving there, but it did. 10 minutes later, it was done. All accounts are under your name only now, he said. I've also added alerts in case anyone attempts access with prior information. I nodded. Thank you. And, if I may ask, is everything all right? It was a kind question, a decent man's question. No, I said honestly, but it will be. From there, I went to the notary's office, carrying the documents Diana had prepared. A woman with a soft Southern accent walked me through every page, stamping and sealing each signature like sacred scripture. I left with a new will, a new trust, a new definition of family. When I got home, the silence didn't weigh this time. It rested around me like a calm blanket. Alyssa's shoes were by the door, the expensive heels with the red soles. I stepped around them. In my room, I placed the folder in a new spot, the locked drawer of my nightstand. I didn't want it buried anymore. It had work to do. The rest of the afternoon, I cleaned. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I dusted the baseboards, scrubbed the sink, washed the windows. I took my time with the cabinet above the stove, where Caleb once hid his birthday whiskey. In the back, behind an expired can of tomato paste, I found something I'd forgotten about. A yellowed envelope addressed in my own handwriting. Inside, 3 photographs. Me and Caleb on the beach, age 5, him wrapped in a towel like a burrito. Caleb and James in front of the garage building a kite. And the last one, Caleb in his graduation gown, hugging me so tightly my glasses were crooked. I stared at the last photo longest. That hug had been real. So had the love. It was the conditions that had changed. That night, I cooked dinner for myself. Just 1 plate. Alyssa came in late. No makeup, blazer tossed over her arm, phone to her ear. She gave me a glance, not rude, just brief, and disappeared into their wing of the house. Caleb didn't come home until past 9. I heard the garage door, the thump of car keys on the counter. I didn't get up. I didn't ask how his day was, and I didn't wait to be asked about mine. The following morning, I walked into the branch again. Not the bank this time, the travel agency downtown. It was a small office, tucked between a bakery and a shoe repair shop. A bell jingled as I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of coffee and ink. Behind the counter sat a young woman with dark curls and a bright scarf looped around her neck. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "How can I help you?" I laid my purse on the counter. "I'd like to buy a one-way ticket." Her smile faltered, just slightly. "To where?" "To Port Townsend, Washington, near the coast." She clicked her keyboard. "When would you like to travel?" "As soon as possible." She found a flight leaving in 3 days. "Do you want me to book return as well?" "No," I said, steady. "One way." Her fingers paused on the keyboard, but she didn't ask why. I was grateful for that. While she printed the confirmation, I thought about the sea. The last time I saw it, Caleb was 10. We camped in a rented cabin, James still alive. The 3 of us roasting marshmallows on a fire pit made from old bricks. Caleb had burned his first marshmallow black and insisted it tasted better that way. I wondered if he even remembered. Ticket in hand, I left the office and stepped into the street, the weight of decisions settling like a warm coat across my shoulders. That evening, I made stew. Thick, hearty, the way Caleb liked when he was a boy. He came home earlier than usual, loosened his tie, and sniffed the air. "Smells good," he said cautiously, as if bracing for impact. Sit, I told him. He obeyed, lowering himself into the chair opposite mine. Alyssa wasn't home yet, which suited me fine. I ladled stew into his bowl, slid bread across the table, then sat. For a few minutes we ate in silence, the sound of spoons against bowls the only rhythm between us. Finally, he spoke. Mom, why are you doing this? I met his eyes. Doing what? You know, the papers, the trust. Diana called me. Of course she had. Diana knew where her loyalty lay with her client, but she also knew the gravity of cutting a son from his mother's estate. She'd tried to ease his shock by calling him herself. You don't trust me? He pressed. I set my spoon down. I don't trust your choices. His face tightened. That's insulting. No, I said calmly. What's insulting is being told my life takes up too much space in my own home. What's insulting is being reduced to an inconvenience while you live under my roof. He flinched. Good. The truth should sting. I didn't mean it that way. But you did mean it, Caleb. And you've meant it for a long time. Every sigh when I cook something not to Alyssa's taste. Every look when I keep the thermostat at 70 instead of 68. Every reminder that this is our home when it's my name on the deed. His spoon clattered into the bowl. So what? You're just going to cut me out? Throw everything away like the suits? I leaned back, folded my hands in my lap. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm saving what's left of me. For a long time, he said nothing. His jaw worked, his hands clenched. But no words came. Then, quieter. You're punishing me. No, Caleb. Punishment is meant to teach. I don't have the strength left to teach you. I'm simply withdrawing. He stared, eyes glinting, then pushed back from the table and left his bowl half full. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the hall like doors closing. I sat there a while longer, finishing my stew. Slowly, deliberately. It was the best meal I'd had in years. The suitcase was smaller than I remembered. I dragged it from the top shelf of the closet, the one where Caleb had once hidden Christmas gifts. Dust coated the handle. The zipper teeth stuck until I tugged hard enough to free them. Inside lay folded sheets I hadn't used in years, pale pink with faint roses. They smelled of cedar, from the sachet I'd tucked in long ago. I left the sheets on the bed and placed the suitcase upright. Open. Waiting. It wasn't time yet. Not quite. But the act of opening it was a promise to myself. At the kitchen table, I wrote a letter. Not long. Just a few lines. May, I may need a place to stay. If it's too much, I understand. Virginia. I slipped it into an envelope, addressed it, and walked it down to the corner mailbox before I could change my mind. By the time I returned, Alyssa was home. She sat at the counter with a glass of wine, scrolling her phone. Her hair was still pinned up from work, a few strands falling loose against her cheek. She looked up as I entered, her eyes sharp. Caleb tells me you've been making legal changes. I set my purse on the hook. That's correct. She swirled her wine. Seems drastic. Drastic is deciding your husband's mother should be placed in a care facility because her sweaters offend your aesthetic. Her lips pressed together. I never said that. You whispered it, I said. But walls in this house are thinner than you think. She didn't argue further, just sipped, eyes fixed on me like I was a math problem she couldn't solve. I went upstairs without another word. 2 days later, a card arrived in the mail. May's handwriting, loose, looping. Aunt Virginia, you are welcome here as long as you like. We have a guest room. Don't think twice. I held the card against my chest for a long moment, my eyes stinging though I hadn't cried in years. That night, I logged onto the old laptop Caleb once dismissed as ancient. It wheezed but worked. I searched rental listings near Mays City. Small apartments with balconies, studios with ocean light. None of them large, none of them fancy. But all of them mine, if I chose. For the first time in decades, I felt a horizon widening instead of narrowing. On Sunday evening, Caleb knocked on my door. Not barged in, knocked. "Come in," I said. He entered cautiously, hands shoved in his pockets. "Alyssa thinks you're angry." "I'm not angry." "You seem angry." I closed the laptop. "I'm not. I'm finished." He frowned. "Finished with what?" "With waiting for you to treat me as though I matter." He sat heavily on the edge of the chair across from me. "Mom, this isn't fair. We've had some misunderstandings, but Alyssa and we want what's best." "For whom?" I asked quietly. He blinked, thrown off balance. "For everyone. For the family." I leaned forward. "When I am erased from your definition of family, Caleb, your intentions don't matter. Only your actions do." His mouth opened, then closed. He looked older suddenly, the lines at his temples deeper. For a moment, he wasn't the confident man in tailored suits. He was the boy who once asked me to chase away thunder. But boys grow up, and sometimes they grow cruel. "I booked a ticket," I said. He stiffened. "A ticket?" "Yes. I'll be gone in 3 days." "Gone where?" "Somewhere I'm welcome." The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with all the things he might have said, but didn't. Apologies. Please. Anger. Instead, he only shook his head, stood, and left without closing the door. I got up, shut it myself, and locked it. Then I turned back to the open suitcase, and for the first time, I started packing. The first thing I packed was my passport. Not because I was leaving the country, but because it felt symbolic. Proof of identity. Proof that I existed beyond the confines of this house. Then came the essentials. Undergarments, socks, 2 blouses, the navy dress I'd worn to James's funeral, and a cardigan that still held the faint scent of lavender. Practical, modest things. Nothing extravagant. When I zipped the bag shut for the night, I felt lighter. The next morning, the closet in the hall stood ajar. Inside, Caleb's side was bare. His remaining coats and jackets were gone. He was in the kitchen, hunched over his coffee. "Where are your things?" I asked. "I took them to storage," he muttered. "Didn't want to risk them ending up in the trash again." His words were sharp, but his eyes flickered with something else. Fear, maybe. "You don't have to worry," I said. "I only clear what doesn't belong." He looked at me as if trying to measure whether that was a threat. By noon, Alyssa had found her voice. She stormed into my room without knocking, her heels biting the wood floor. "You told him you're leaving?" she demanded. "Yes. Where?" "Not your concern." Her face flushed. "Do you realize what this looks like? To his colleagues? To his friends? His mother disappearing like she's been mistreated." "She has," I interrupted. She gaped at me, stunned. Maybe she expected denial or soft excuses. She didn't expect truth laid bare, simple as bread on a plate. I stood, walked to the window, and opened it wide. Fresh air rushed in. "Your image is not my responsibility, Alyssa. It never was." She spun on her heel and left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the glass. That evening, Caleb confronted me. He stood in my doorway, not entering. "Why are you doing this, Mom? Running away doesn't solve anything." "I'm not running," I said evenly. "I'm walking out the front door with my head up." "Is this about money?" Because if it is, it's not, I cut in. You already got enough of that from me over the years. He flinched, and I knew he remembered. The checks for his tuition, the down payment for his first condo, the loan for the business venture that never returned a dime. Every time, I handed him money with a smile, pretending it was nothing. It was never nothing. You can't just abandon us, he said, his voice rising. I met his gaze steadily. You abandoned me first. You just did it without leaving the house. He looked at me like I'd struck him. For a long moment, his jaw worked, but no words came. Then he turned and left, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Later that night, I heard Alyssa whispering through the thin walls. She's making us look terrible, she hissed. People will think we forced her out. Maybe we did, Caleb muttered. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. For years, I'd begged in silence for scraps of kindness. Now they worried not about losing me, but about losing face. The house no longer felt like mine. It felt like a hotel I'd overstayed. But that knowledge didn't wound anymore. It freed me. The next day, I opened the closet where Caleb's suits had once hung. Empty now, save for one wire hanger swaying lightly, as if stirred by some invisible breeze. I lifted it, held it in my hand. Space, I whispered. Then I laid it gently back on the bar. Space was what I was taking, my own at last. The morning sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, catching the dust motes as if even they had something to celebrate. I sat at the table with my tea, unhurried, the suitcase waiting upstairs like a loyal dog. Alyssa entered in her silk robe, hair pinned but loose around her face. She paused when she saw me. There was something calculating in her stillness, the way a chess player hovers over the board. You're really leaving, she said, voice flat. Yes. She sat opposite me, folding her arms. Do you know what this does to Caleb? To his reputation? People will ask questions. His mother walking out. It will look like failure. I stirred my tea slowly. That's because it is. Her lips tightened. You're cruel. No, I said, meeting her eyes. I've been accommodating. I've been silent. I've been erased in my own home so you could feel larger. But cruel? No. Cruel is whispering about nursing homes when the woman who gave your husband life is still making your dinners. She flinched. It was quick, but I saw it. You think you're teaching us a lesson? She said bitterly. I shook my head. I'm not your teacher. I'm simply done being your furniture. She pushed her chair back sharply, the scrape shrill against the floor. You'll regret this. Perhaps, I said, lifting my cup. But regret is lighter than resentment. I can carry it. She left without another word. That evening, Caleb came home early. He lingered in the hallway, his tie half loosened, his eyes flicking from me to the suitcase by the stairs. You've packed, he said. I have. He rubbed his forehead. Alyssa's upset. I'm sure she is. She says you're trying to make a point. I don't need to make points anymore, Caleb. My life isn't a debate team exercise. I'm leaving because staying has become smaller than I am. He looked at me for a long moment. Something in his eyes, fear, confusion, maybe a flicker of the boy he'd been, surfaced. But then it was gone, buried under the weight of his practiced, polished manhood. You'll come back, he said, almost like an order. No, I said softly. I won't. After he left for the gym, the house fell quiet. I stood in the kitchen, tracing the grain of the wooden countertop. James had built it himself, sanding and staining late into the night, muttering about splinters. Every surface here had history, my history, and yet I felt no ache at the thought of leaving it behind, just relief. The phone rang. I nearly ignored it, but curiosity made me check. May's number glowed on the screen. Aunt Virginia? Her voice was warm, a little uncertain. I got your letter. I meant what I wrote. You can stay as long as you want. I've cleared the guest room. It's small, but it has a window that faces the water. I closed my eyes, a smile pulling at my lips. That sounds perfect. Are you sure about this? She asked gently. Yes, I said. For the first time in a long time, I am sure. Later that night, Alyssa knocked on my door. I didn't invite her in, but she entered anyway. She perched on the edge of the bed, her posture stiff. I don't hate you, she said, not meeting my eyes. I know. I just don't know how to live with you. I folded my hands. That's the truth at last. Her eyes darted to mine, startled. Maybe she thought I'd argue, or comfort her, or deny it. But I didn't. You don't have to live with me anymore, I said gently. You got what you wanted. She swallowed hard, then stood. For once, she didn't slam the door. She closed it softly. In the early hours, I woke and went to the window. Outside, the bins were lined neatly along the curb, waiting for the morning truck. I thought of the suits that had been carried away in their bellies, gone, without ceremony. And I thought, that's how I'll leave too, quietly, without fuss. But not discarded, chosen. The distinction made all the difference. I went back to bed and slept soundly. Monday morning arrived with a strange calm. The air felt clearer, as if the house itself knew I was preparing to step away from it. I brewed tea, buttered toast, and sat at the breakfast nook with the small square window that overlooked the garden. The hydrangeas were in bloom, heavy with blue blossoms that bowed their heads like tired dancers. I was mid-sip when a knock came at the back door. Light, hesitant. It was Thomas. 17, tall but still awkward in his own skin, his backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder. He was the only one who still knocked when entering Grandma's space. Morning, he said, eyes shifting nervously. Morning, I replied. Hungry? He shrugged, but the look on his face told me yes. I slid the plate of toast toward him, and he sat, chewing quietly. After a moment, he spoke. Dad said you're leaving. I stirred my tea. That's true. He frowned. Why? Because this house no longer feels like mine. He looked down at his plate. I don't want you to go. I reached across the table, touched his hand lightly. I know. Thomas had always been different. Where Caleb had grown sharper with age, Thomas had a softness, an awareness. When his parents bickered, he'd sneak into my room to play cards or read in silence. He never asked for money, never complained about dinners. He just saw me. Where will you go? He asked, his voice low. To a place where I can breathe, by the water. He was quiet for a long time, then finally whispered, Can I visit? The knot in my chest loosened. Yes, darling. Always. I stood and went to the bookshelf, pulling down a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. Inside, a slip of paper marked a passage I had once underlined. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. I handed him the book. This is for you. And remember, Thomas, always think for yourself. He held the book like it was something fragile. His eyes shone. Thanks, Grandma. Later that afternoon, Caleb came home early. He noticed the book missing from the shelf. "Where's that old novel?" he asked casually. I gave it to Thomas. He frowned. "You shouldn't encourage him with sentimental things. He needs to focus on practical skills." I looked at him steadily. Practical skills will make him a living. Sentiment will make him human. Which do you prefer for your son? He didn't answer. He just picked up his briefcase and walked away. That evening, I prepared supper. Chicken with lemon and herbs, roasted carrots, rice. A simple meal, but filling. I set 3 places, not 4. When Caleb noticed, he asked, "Why only 3?" "Because this is our last dinner together," I said. He froze. Alyssa stared. "What do you mean, last?" he demanded. "I'm leaving tomorrow. The ticket is booked. My bag is packed. Tonight, we eat as a family for the final time in this house." Neither of them touched their forks at first. Eventually, Alyssa picked at the rice, her lips tight. Caleb pushed food around his plate, as though appetite had abandoned him. I ate calmly, savoring every bite. It wasn't the food I was tasting, it was freedom. When the meal was done, I rose, stacked my plate, and carried it to the sink. "Where will you go?" Alyssa asked finally, her voice clipped. "Somewhere that welcomes me." They had no reply. That night, Thomas slipped into my room again. He sat on the floor by my suitcase, the book clutched to his chest. "I'll write to you," he said. "Good," I whispered. "Grandma?" He hesitated. "Do you hate Dad?" I shook my head. "No, I don't hate him. I've simply stopped excusing him." Thomas nodded slowly, as if filing that truth away for the future. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the creak of the old house settling into itself. At last, he stood, hugged me tightly, and whispered, "Don't forget me." I held him close. Never. The morning of my departure came gray and heavy, the kind of sky that presses down like a lid. I rose before anyone else, brewed tea, and sat in the breakfast nook one last time. The garden looked still, the hydrangeas damp with early dew. I thought about how many mornings I'd sat in that very spot, waiting for footsteps on the stairs, cooking meals, folding laundry, listening to the quiet rhythm of a house that had once been mine. But not today. Today, it belonged to them. I prepared dinner early. Yes, dinner in the morning. A whole chicken, stuffed with lemon slices and garlic cloves, rubbed with thyme. The smell filled the house by noon. I roasted carrots until their edges browned and sweetened, and cooked rice fluffy and light. By the time Caleb and Alyssa emerged, the table was set. 3 places. My best porcelain. Candles unlit. "What's this?" Caleb asked, his tone wary. "A farewell," I said. They exchanged a glance, Alyssa's brows tightening, but they sat. We ate quietly at first. Caleb picked at his plate. Alyssa speared carrots without tasting. I chewed deliberately, slowly, as though every bite was a declaration. Halfway through, I set down my fork. "This is our last meal together in this house," I said. My voice was steady, almost gentle. Alyssa stiffened. Caleb froze. "I don't want you to misunderstand. I'm not fleeing. I'm not punishing. I'm simply reclaiming what little time and dignity remain to me." Caleb swallowed hard. "Mom, this is ridiculous. You're overreacting." I held up a hand. "Stop. If you call this overreacting, then you haven't been paying attention. I've been shrinking for years to fit inside this house with you. I've shrunk so small I almost disappeared." Alyssa opened her mouth, but I turned to her. "And you, don't tell me you tried. You didn't. You wanted me gone, and you'll have what you wanted. Congratulations." She flushed, lips pressed tight. I reached for my glass of water. "You've mistaken my silence for weakness. Tonight I'm correcting that mistake." For a moment, no one spoke. The clink of the fork against Alyssa's plate was the only sound. Then Caleb leaned forward, his voice low, almost pleading. "So, what happens now? You just walk away? From me? From your grandson?" I looked at him. Really looked. His face was older than I remembered, lined at the eyes, tension carved into his jaw. The boy who once clung to me in thunderstorms was gone, replaced by a man who had forgotten who built the roof over his head. "I'm not walking away from Thomas," I said softly. "He will always find me. But from you?" I paused. "Yes, I am." His mouth opened, but no words came. He looked at Alyssa, but she had no rescue to offer. I stood, collected my plate, carried it to the sink. "Enjoy your evening," I said quietly. And with that, I left them sitting at a table that finally felt empty to someone other than me. Upstairs, I opened the suitcase, slipped in the cardigan, the navy dress, the envelope with documents. On top, I placed the framed photograph of James holding Caleb as a baby, because despite everything, the memory of love belonged to me too. I zipped it closed, sat on the edge of the bed, and breathed. Tomorrow, I would be gone. The night before leaving, I wrote the letter. It wasn't long. I didn't want it to sound like a sermon or like one of those dramatic parting speeches you find in novels. Just the truth, plain and unpolished, the way I've always spoken when no one is listening. I used the stationery James had once given me, the cream-colored pages with faint blue lines. My handwriting had grown shakier over the years, but it was still mine. "Caleb, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not dead, not lost. Just gone from this house. I leave not because I hate you, but because I love myself enough now to stop living as if I don't matter. I will not beg for space in a home I bought with my hands, nor will I remain where my presence is treated as clutter. I have removed your name from my accounts, my will, and my trust. That is not revenge. It is consequence. Consequence of years in which I gave without return, forgave without apology, and waited without answer. You may call it harsh. I call it honest. Do not look for me. I will not be far, but I will not be near either. I wish you health, though I cannot wish you happiness if you continue as you are. Happiness built on the erasure of others never lasts. Remember this when you look at your son, for he sees more than you think. Goodbye. Mother. I folded it once, slid it into an envelope, and left it on the dining room table beside a neat stack of documents, the new deed transfer to the trust, the revocation of power of attorney, the updated will naming May as my heir, the medical directive, signed and sealed. I didn't add explanations. The papers spoke for themselves. The suitcase sat by the door before dawn. I wore my gray slacks, my comfortable shoes, and a blouse James had once said made my eyes look brighter. Practical armor. I made tea, buttered one slice of toast, and ate it slowly, savoring the silence. The house was still asleep. When the taxi honked outside, I stood, took one last look around, and lifted the handle of my suitcase. On the stairs, I hesitated. A figure stood at the bottom. Thomas, barefoot, clutching the book I'd given him. "Grandma," he whispered. I smiled. "You're up early. I didn't want you to leave without saying goodbye." I walked down slowly, set the suitcase aside, and pulled him into my arms. He held me tight, his shoulders trembling. "Will I see you again?" he asked. "Yes," I said firmly. "Whenever you want. You'll always know where to find me." He nodded, though tears brimmed in his eyes. "I'll write. I promise. I know you will." We stood like that for a long moment, until the driver honked again. I kissed his forehead, picked up my suitcase, and opened the door. Thomas stood on the porch, watching as I walked down the steps. He didn't wave, but I didn't need him to. His eyes said enough. The taxi door closed, and the house slipped behind me like a shadow. I didn't look back. Not once. The urge was there, sharp and pulling, but I resisted. Looking back would have meant doubt. Looking forward was the only direction left. At the airport, I moved through the motions: ticket, bag check, security. Everything felt lighter than it should have, as if each step peeled away layers I didn't know I'd been carrying. When I finally sat at the gate, I reached into my purse and touched the photograph I'd packed, the one of James holding baby Caleb. My thumb brushed over James's smile. "You'd understand," I whispered. "You always did." For the first time in years, I felt his presence not as an ache, but as a steadying hand at my back, urging me on. By evening, I would be in a new city. By nightfall, I would sleep in a new bed. Not borrowed, not tolerated, chosen. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and let the hum of the airport wash over me. For the first time in decades, I belonged to myself. The train station smelled of old wood, diesel, and coffee. I chose the train over the plane at the last minute. Something about watching the landscape roll by felt gentler, more human, more like the kind of goodbye I wanted to give myself. The conductor helped me lift my suitcase onto the step. "Traveling far?" he asked. "Far enough," I said. The seat was firm but comfortable by the window. As the train lurched forward, the town blurred into fields, then forests, then towns I didn't know. My reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar. Older, yes, but also lighter, like someone who had finally put down a heavy load. For hours I watched the world slide past. Barns collapsing into themselves, children's bicycles abandoned in yards, rivers catching the sun. Somewhere behind me, a baby cried. Across the aisle, a young man tapped on his laptop. Life continued, vast and indifferent. I felt strangely comforted by that. When the train finally slowed into Port Townsend, May was waiting on the platform. She looked so much like her mother, my sister Evelyn, that for a moment I lost my breath. Same quick smile, same brown hair that never obeyed a comb. "Aunt Virginia!" She ran forward and hugged me tightly, almost knocking the suitcase from my hand. I laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from my own mouth in too long. "You'll hurt yourself hugging an old woman like that." "Never," she said firmly. We walked together through the small station. Outside, the sea air hit me at once. Salt, gulls, the faint sound of waves. It was like stepping back into a world I'd almost forgotten. May's house was modest, painted a soft green with white trim, the kind of place built for comfort, not show. Inside, books were stacked on tables. A cat stretched on the windowsill, and the smell of something baking lingered. "The guest room is small," May said, pushing open a door, "but the bed's firm and the window faces the water. I thought you'd like that." I set my suitcase down. "It's perfect." That night, we sat in her kitchen with mugs of chamomile tea. She asked about Caleb, carefully, as though stepping around broken glass. I told her the truth, enough of it at least. "And now?" she asked. "Now," I said. I start again, on my terms. The next morning, I walked to the market alone. Vendors sold apples, jars of honey, handmade soaps. No one knew me. No one expected anything from me. I bought a small basket of pears just because they looked beautiful. On the way back, I stopped at the library. The woman at the desk gave me a card application, and I filled it out with a sense of ceremony. A library card again, after all these years. It felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. At May's, I placed the pears in a bowl on the counter. I read on the porch. The sea spread before me like an endless invitation. When the cat curled into my lap, purring, I let myself exhale in a way I hadn't in decades. That evening, May asked if I'd consider looking at apartments. There are a few nearby, she said carefully. Nothing big, but you'd be close, independent. I smiled. That's exactly what I want. I wrote Thomas a postcard that night, a picture of the lighthouse. My dear boy, I arrived safely. The sea is just as beautiful as I remembered. Don't worry about me. I am more than fine. Read the book. Think for yourself. And know you are loved. Grandma. I dropped it in the mailbox on the corner, the air crisp and salty around me. When I returned, May was on the porch with 2 mugs of cocoa. She handed one to me. Feels like home already, doesn't it? She asked. Yes, I said, sipping. For the first time, it truly does. The waves outside whispered against the shore. The sound of belonging. I knew then. I hadn't run away. I had simply come home to myself. May printed a list of apartments and circled 3 with a red pen. Close to the bus line, no steep stairs, good light, she said, tapping each photo like a small blessing. I liked the way she sorted the world, not by price or prestige, but by how a person might actually live inside it. We saw the first place at noon, a studio above a bakery. The hallway smelled of sugar and warm butter, and the window faced the alley where the bakers cooled trays on rolling racks. The landlord, a woman in her 50s named Ms. Ortega, walked us through. Quiet building, she said. No parties, no late-night music. The ovens hum before dawn, but you get used to it. People who love mornings do well here. I smiled. Mornings are my oldest friends. The room was small, but the walls were clean, and the sink shone. A narrow balcony held 2 dented planters, empty and patient. I stepped outside and could just see a slice of water between rooftops, a strip of blue like a kept promise. How soon could it be available? I asked. End of the week, Ms. Ortega replied. Month to month or year lease. First, last, and a modest deposit. I nodded. Modest is a generous word, but I had saved for years against days exactly like this. We thanked her and moved on to the next place, a ground floor unit with carpet that tried to hide old stains, and a third with glossy gray cabinets that looked like they belonged to a catalog family. The bakery studio followed me in my thoughts, like the smell of cinnamon. On the sidewalk, May squeezed my arm. You liked the first one. I did. Then let's not pretend we need to keep shopping. We walked back. Miss Ortega looked pleased to see decisive people. Decisive people make a landlord's day shorter. I filled out the application, wrote the deposit check with a steady hand, and signed a year lease. She slid a brass key across the counter. It was warm from her palm and heavier than it looked. Welcome home, she said simply. The words landed softly and stayed. We celebrated with coffee from the bakery downstairs. I carried my cup carefully and tried not to cry when the cashier included 2 biscuits on the house for a new neighbor. Kindness, when it arrives unannounced, Feels like a chair pulled out just as your knees give. The rest became logistics, the kind of work that used to bury me and now felt like building a nest. A call to the utility company, another to the internet provider, a change of address form at the post office with its particular smell of rubber bands and dust. At the bank, I opened a local account and arranged small transfers from the trust's income fund to cover rent and groceries. The young teller, soft voice, acne scars, gentle eyes, took his time explaining every line. I listened to each one. When he finished, he said, "If you need help navigating the online portal, just come in. We'll do it together." The word together, spoken without claiming anything, warmed a place in me I had forgotten. Back at May's, we sat on the floor with a tape measure and a sheet of graph paper to map the studio. "A small table by the balcony," I said. "2 chairs, even if I mostly sit alone. Bookshelf against the east wall. A lamp with a pull chain I can find in the dark. And a rug," May added, drawing a rectangle. "Something with color." "I have enough color in my head," I said, but smiled. "Maybe something soft." We found a thrift store that afternoon, the kind where furniture carries histories in the nicked edges and careful repairs. I touched a round oak table scarred by years of elbows and homework and holiday dinners I hadn't lived. "This one," I said. 2 ladder-back chairs with woven seats volunteered themselves from a corner. A lamp with a chipped blue base winked at me from the shelf, not shy about its imperfection. We arranged delivery for move-in day, things chosen for how they felt, not how they looked to other people. What a radical luxury. That evening, I stood on May's porch and called Diana. I gave her my new address, asked her to file the formal notice, and requested that all future correspondence be sent to the studio. "Understood," she said. "You sound lighter, Virginia." "I am," I answered. "Paperwork makes some people smaller. Today, it made me fit again." After dinner, I wrote to Thomas, no postcard this time, a proper letter with an envelope and stamp. I included the address, the spare key code Ms. Ortega provided for the building door, and a little map with a star where the bakery sits. At the end, I wrote, "You are allowed to grow into the kind of man who returns calls and keeps promises. If you choose that, you will feel taller in your own skin." Before bed, my phone lit with Caleb's name. I watched it buzz across the table and settle into silence. He didn't leave a message. A minute later, a text arrived. "Where are you staying?" No question mark, just command disguised as inquiry. I set the phone face down and turned off the lamp. The sea hissed softly beyond the glass, and the night did not ask for an explanation. In the morning, May drove me to the studio with 2 boxes of kitchen things she insisted I take. "Only the duplicates," she said. I had 3 whisks. "That's a cry for help." We laughed, carried the boxes up, and set them on the floor. Empty space welcomed us, not as accusation, but as invitation. I hung my cardigan on the back of a chair. I placed the lamp by the window and pulled its chain. The bulb glowed like a small sun. I opened the balcony door and stepped out. The air tasted of salt and yeast. Somewhere below, trays slid, bells chimed, a new batch of bread met the morning. "This will do," I said. "It will do more than that," May answered. We stood without talking for a while, 2 women at different points on the same long road, listening to the gentle fuss of a life that, at last, belonged to me. Moving into the studio was easier than I expected. The oak table and ladder-back chairs arrived on a truck, driven by 2 young men who carried them up the narrow stairs without complaint. The lamp with its chipped blue base sat proudly by the balcony door, casting a warm glow even in the afternoon. I unpacked slowly, not rushing. Each drawer filled with my folded clothes felt like a statement. I belong here. I laid the photograph of James and baby Caleb on the small bookshelf, not as an altar, but as a reminder that love had once existed, even if it had turned brittle over time. May helped me hang the curtains. "It's cozy," she said, stepping back. "It's mine," I replied. That first night, the sounds of the bakery downstairs lulled me. Trays clattering, soft voices, the smell of yeast rising through the floorboards. I slept better than I had in years. A week passed, then 2. Letters from Thomas arrived in careful handwriting, telling me about his classes, about how Alyssa had grown quieter, how Caleb spent long evenings in his office, staring at nothing. Each letter ended the same. "I miss you, Grandma." I wrote back every time. Not long letters, just steady ones. Words to let him know I was anchored, that he could find me whenever he needed. Caleb tried calling twice more. I didn't answer. His messages grew shorter, sharper. "Where are you?" "Then you need to talk to me." I set the phone aside. A son who treated his mother like luggage doesn't get to demand location updates. Instead, I baked. Pear tarts from the fruit market. A loaf of bread with too much rosemary, but still edible. When I carried a warm pie down to the bakery staff, they welcomed me like I had been theirs forever. One girl hugged me, flour on her apron. "You should come by in the mornings. We'll keep a chair for you." They did. And soon I had a chair in a bakery, a chair by the sea, a chair in a home that fit me. One afternoon, May handed me an envelope. "This came for you," she said softly. Inside was a letter from Caleb. His handwriting had grown unfamiliar, sharp, uneven. Nothing like the careful script he used as a boy. "Mother, I don't understand why you've chosen this path. Alyssa thinks you want to punish us. I don't want to believe that. Thomas misses you. I do too. Come back. Let's talk." It was not an apology. It was not accountability. It was a summons disguised as sentiment. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it back in the envelope, and tucked it in the drawer. I did not write back. Some words do not deserve an answer. On the 3rd Sunday in my new home, May brought over fresh flowers and set them on my table. "It suits you here," she said, looking around the room with satisfaction. "It does," I agreed. I poured us tea, and we sat with the balcony door open, the smell of bread drifting in. The sea glittered beyond the rooftops. May looked at me thoughtfully. "Do you regret it? Leaving like that?" I shook my head. Regret belongs to the ones who stay silent. I didn't. She reached across the table, squeezed my hand. "Good. Then you've won." I smiled. Not loudly, not triumphantly, just quietly. Because it was true. That evening, I wrote one more letter to Thomas. "My dear boy, the world will always try to make you smaller. Don't let it. Claim your space, even if others call it selfish. Sometimes selfishness is just survival. Sometimes it is dignity. Remember that. And remember me." I sealed it, placed it by the door to mail in the morning. The lamp glowed on the balcony. The sea whispered against the shore. And I knew. My story had changed course. Not because I was saved, but because I had saved myself. Morning came in layers. The clatter from the bakery below, gulls arguing over something invisible, a thin blade of light sliding across my floorboards. I boiled water in my new dented kettle and set 2 mugs on the oak table out of habit, then laughed and put one back. Habit takes time to shrink. I watered the empty planters on the balcony as if they already held herbs. The baker's apprentice shouted good morning from the alley, and I waved my dish towel like a flag. It felt ordinary. Ordinary, after the storm, is a kind of miracle. Near noon, someone rang. A boy's knock, quick, unsure. I opened the door and Thomas stood there in a wrinkled hoodie, hair flattened by a bus seat, the book I'd given him tucked under his arm. "You found me," I said. "I mapped the route," he answered, a little proud and a little breathless. "I brought pastries. The woman downstairs said you'd refuse if I came empty-handed." "She's right," I said, and pulled him in. He looked around the studio as if it were a museum of small, important things. "It's you," he said softly. "Everything fits." "Sit," I told him. "Tell me your news." We ate still warm croissants at the table. He spoke about classes, a physics project, the way the light hits the school lawn in the late afternoon. Then he grew quiet. "Dad's angry," he said, but not loud, just hollow. He told me to stay out of grown-up matters. "You are a grown-up matter," I said. He swallowed. "I told him I took the bus to see you. He didn't stop me. He just said to be back by dinner." "Good," I said. "You came to see me, not to carry messages." His eyes lifted. "I'm sorry for everything. I didn't say anything when they were unkind. I thought silence meant respect." He shook his head. "It doesn't." "No," I said. "Silence sometimes means consent. You're learning. That's enough." He slid an envelope across the table, ragged where he'd sealed it badly. Inside was a note in his careful hand. "I will visit on purpose, not by accident. I will speak when it matters. I will be the kind of man who makes room, not the kind who takes it." Underneath, he'd drawn a tiny star. I put the paper back and touched the corner. "Keep a copy," I said. "A promise works best when you can see it." He smiled, relief loosening his shoulders. I packed him a small box with pears and a slice of my 2 rosemary bread. At the door, I pressed a spare building code into his palm. "Don't overuse it," I said. "Arrive invited, or for true emergencies." He nodded. "I'll earn it every time." After he left, the room held his warmth for a while. I washed the mugs and set them to dry, then went downstairs to return the pastry plate. The baker's wife insisted I take a bundle of basil starts for my planters before they wilt from being admired. I planted them with my thumbs in the damp soil, the smell sharp and clean. Space can be planted. Who knew? Toward evening, my phone hummed with a number I knew too well. I let it ring twice, then answered. "Mother?" Caleb said, voice low. "I got your address from the return label on Thomas's letter. I didn't ask him. I promise." "All right," I said. "I've been thinking," he continued. "At night, mostly. The house is quieter without you. Alyssa says that's what we wanted, and yet—" He stopped. "I read your letter again. I keep reading the part about consequence." I waited. "I can't fix the past," he said finally, the words rough. "But I can say, I'm sorry for making you small in the place you built. I'm sorry for the suits, for the coat rack, for every time I chose comfort over you." A breath. "I don't know how to be different yet. I want to try." I looked at the basil on my fingers, the green stained into the lines. "Trying is a verb," I said. "Not a speech." "I know." Another pause. "Could I visit? Not today, sometime. As your son. No keys, no papers, no talk of money." "You can," I said. "There are conditions." "Of course." "You will not come to persuade me to return. You will not arrive to ask for anything I did not offer. You will not enlist Thomas. And if you speak of my life as clutter again, the door will close for good." "Understood," he said quietly. "I would like someday to bring you a loaf I baked myself." I almost smiled. "Practice. Bread doesn't lie." He laughed, surprised at himself. For a moment I heard the boy under the man. "Thank you for answering," he said. "Good night." "Good night, Caleb." When the call ended, I stood still until my pulse matched the bakery's low hum beneath my floor. I wasn't rejoicing, and I wasn't mourning. I was acknowledging. Sometimes that's all grown people can do with each other. Acknowledge, then go on. I wrote to May that I'd pay next month's rent early. I made a note to buy a second chair cushion. I settled on the rug and traced the room with my eyes, taking inventory of a life that now fit into one square of city, with a slice of sea and the warm breath of bread. As the streetlights clicked on, I opened the balcony door. Night air moved through the curtains, lifting them like slow breathing. Somewhere below, someone whistled a tune I couldn't place. The basil leaves trembled, then held steady. Once my son said my clothes took up space. I believed him long enough to forget myself. Now I have space measured in light, in steam from a kettle, in a chair that stays pulled out until I choose to push it in. I have a key that turns in a lock that answers only to me. I have a boy becoming a better man because I stopped being the floor under his feet. I have a name that sounds right again in my own mouth. If you recognize yourself in any of this, take something small today and make it yours. A drawer, a morning, a sentence that you say out loud. And if you want more stories told plainly by a woman who has learned not to disappear, leave a comment and follow along so I know you're here.